Mr. Ambassador, thank you for speaking to Diplomatic Connections. I wanted to ask you first of all about the reception you had quite recently to celebrate the 110th anniversary of Luxembourg's diplomatic relations with the United States. This makes it 1903, I think. So, what are the circumstances? What were the circumstances of this?
Well, it was a particular circumstance. We got our independence in 1867. At that time, the United States recognized us, but did have their relations to the Netherlands because the Dutch king was also Grand Duke of Luxembourg. And by the end of the 19th century, there was a separation of the two royal houses. And it was a junior branch of the House of Orange, the Nassau-Weilburg, who took over the Grand Duchy. And there was Queen Wilhelmina who stayed Queen of the Netherlands. And by that time, the American government, which was President Theodore Roosevelt's government, decided it would be good to recognize Luxembourg as, not to recognize, you were recognized, but to establish diplomatic relations with the Grand Duchy separately from the Netherlands. One of the reasons being also the large Luxembourg community in the United States. There had been during the whole 19th century a massive emigration. We were very poor then, back then. It was before the discovery of the steel industry, and about 1/3 of the population emigrated to the United States. So one of the reasons which were invoked by the Roosevelt government were that since there were such a large Luxembourg community in the United States, especially around Chicago and Illinois and Wisconsin and so on, it would be good to have a direct diplomatic relationship.
And you opened reciprocal embassies?
No, for some time we had a non-resident ambassador
right.
From the Netherlands, and then by the 1920s there was a non-resident minister. Right. And the first resident ambassador was in 1949 by President Truman. Right. And she's a famous lady. She was called Pearl Mester.
Oh, right.
The hostess
of
with
the
musical,
mostest
yes. Of the musical Call Me Madam. She was the first ambassador. Before it was a legation, and we had a minister.
Yes, I see. And and it was the same here, I presume, at the same time. In other words,
and we had the same time here.
Luxembourg.
We had started during the war. We had a
always
permanent
in
ambassador.
This splendid building.
Which is linked to this splendid building, which was the residence of our Grand Duchess, which was in exile then. She was the host of President Roosevelt, and she spent her time between United States and UK during the 5 years of the war, while our government was located in London.
So you had a government in exile in London.
Yes.
And you
and
had
the head of state,
and the head of state came to the United States
and lived in Canada and London.
And lived in this building,
yes.
Which of course is what the Dutch family, royal family, did as well. They came to the United States. Right. Well, since we've mentioned the Grand Duchy, perhaps it's better if we explain a little bit about what Luxembourg is all about. Especially that it has, I mean, what is a Grand Duchy exactly?
Well, the Grand Duchies, there were quite many in the 18th and 19th century. We are the last survivor. You had the Grand Duchy of Toscana, which were in Italy. You had the Grand Duchy of Baden in Germany. You had the Grand Duchy of Finland. So this was a title which was quite known, and we were given this title when, after the French Revolution, there was a Treaty of Vienna, who redesigned. Before we had been part of the Spanish and then Austrian Netherlands, right. And then it was redrafted, and the Austrian Netherlands were given to the Dutch king, who had the independent provinces, plus the Dutch Netherlands, which was a new kingdom of the Netherlands, which comprised at that time Belgium and the Netherlands. And he was also King of Grand Duke of Luxembourg, but it was a separate country.
But in other words, a Grand Duchy, the head of state in a Grand Duchy is a Grand Duke.
He's a Grand Duke. For the rest, if you replace the name Grand Duke by the name King, it is exactly the same system as all European monarchies. It works exactly the same way. It's just that we are the last ones who have still a reigning monarch which has the title Grand Duke.
And your Grand Duchy family recently had a royal wedding.
Yes, Crown Prince last year married and with a Belgian countess, and it was a great celebration throughout the country because that was one proof that the monarchical line is assured for the decades to come.
Right. But in terms of the actual country, which is wedged in between Germany, France, and the Netherlands, it's a population of 300,000?
No, 500,000 now.
Oh, 500,000 now. I see.
Plus 200,000 what we call frontier workers who live in France, in Germany, and in Belgium, which are neighboring countries, but who work in Luxembourg.
I see.
But they stay in their every evening. They go back to their houses.
They come
commuters.
in every day. They're commuters.
A bit like Virginia and Washington D.C.
Except that they commute to a different country.
Yes. But in Europe, these frontiers do not exist anymore.
Yes.
So it wouldn't make a difference. You just see a panel. We are now in Luxembourg, but there are no controls.
And the main industry used to be steel, but I gather it is no longer steel in the sense that now the high tech has taken over, etc.
Well, steel is still an important industry, and ArcelorMittal, which is the largest steel conglomerate in the world with about 300,000 workers, has its seat in Luxembourg. And we also have some specialized steel mills left in the country, but which employ much less people than before, but they do highly specialized things. You might be surprised to see that the new Freedom Building in New York has been built with Luxembourg beams.
I see. Right.
And so are many of the skyscrapers in the United States and in the world are done with beams which have been designed and manufactured in Luxembourg. But beyond that, we have tried to diversify our industry. So we have gone into research and high tech. We have gone into chemical industries, automotive, supply industries. We are now developing very much the themes of the future, which we decided would be for our country, research and development in the field of health and in the field of environment. Plus we have communications, which is has become a very important sector. The largest private satellite company in the world, SES, is in Luxembourg, not only its seat but also its operations, and they cover the 5 continents, and they have about 60 different satellites, which were at the beginning used mainly for TV programs, but now also increasingly into data transmission. You
mentioned before that you had a large sort of daily immigrant population. You are in fact surrounded by major countries in Europe. How difficult is it to maintain your independent identity in a circumstance like this?
Well, it has worked remarkably well. We have, although we have now, without even counting these commuting workers, we have 40% of people living in Luxembourg who have a foreign passport. However, we try to integrate them, especially through the language. We try to have people learning the language, and this has done remarkably well. We have, in spite of the fact of this high percentage of foreigners, we do not have one single xenophobic movement in Luxembourg. You know, in many of European countries there are parties who criticize. Yes. This does not exist in Luxembourg. There's not. We had elections last month. We had 9 parties. Not one single one had on its program the fact that we should diminish the number of foreigners and so on. We all recognize that we need foreigners because, unfortunately, our population is so small that it does not suffice to provide the labor force we need for our economy, and which is that everybody recognizes at the base of our common prosperity. So it would be foolish to be
Yes.
xenophobic,
Exclusive,
because we need people to do the work.
Right.
And we cannot produce them ourselves unless we institute a rate of 5 children per family, which would be difficult to achieve.
Yes, yes. But in terms of the countries around you, which one do you suppose exerts the strongest influence? Would it be Germany, for example?
Well, historically and also economically, it would be Belgium, because we did not only have the Benelux, but since 1921 we have also the Belgo-Luxembourg Economic Union, which was the first customs union in Europe long before the European Union even started, and also for a long time we had a monetary union. The Belgian and Luxembourg franc were in one single currency before we both joined the euro. So economically there is still very great links with Belgium, which have also quite a similar outlook on things. For the other part, Germany would be the strongest influence, because many great companies work for the German market. All the technical matters we have usually do come from Germany rather than from France. And France would have a more cultural influence, I would say.
Well, but there is a Luxembourg language. Is there
we have 3 languages. We have one national language, which is Luxembourgish, and which is a language that is growing, which is developing, because we are pushing also the non-speakers. We provide free lessons, free courses, so that more and more people speak Luxembourgish. It has also much more developed in common day intercourse. For instance, when 50 years ago you had gone to Parliament, everybody would have spoken French.
Right.
Nowadays, the only language used among Luxembourgers is Luxembourgish. And also we have a Luxembourgish-speaking TV, which promoted a lot
Right.
the use of
But
the
is this
language.
mandated, or is this something which has kind of been developed in a
It has
voluntary
developed
way?
progressively, because in a country where you have so much diversity, we feel that language is a factor of unification and integration. And we also encourage, through these free courses and lessons, foreigners who reside in Luxembourg to learn the language, so that they can be better integrated with the rest of the population. Plus, in addition to this national language, we have 2 official languages, which are French and German.
I see.
The laws, for instance, are all in French, the written laws.
Right.
The tribunals function in French and so on.
I see. In other words, you can, in Parliament, for example, or perhaps in the courts, you can speak Luxembourgish or German or French, and it's acceptable.
Well, the court is a very good example, I would say, because the witnesses normally speak in Luxembourgish when they're Luxembourgers, when you have testimonies. The reports from the police are in German, and the lawyers, the barristers, and the judges speak in French.
I see.
In the same, during the same session, during the same audience.
So the average Luxembourger, yes.
Luxembourger,
Grows up trilingual, practically.
Normally, yes. He's trilingual, and most of people who have high school education also have at least a basic notion of English.
I see. English as well.
Yes, English is a growing language, I would say.
As far as the foreigners are concerned, this is a parenthesis actually, but it seems to me that one of the reasons why you have so many foreigners is because there are many international institutions. For example, the European Court of Justice is now based in Luxembourg, is it not?
Actually, we have a number of institutions in Luxembourg. The European Court of Justice is from the beginning,
right,
and the Court of Editors. There is also some services of the Commission.
That's right.
And the Secretariat of the European Parliament have all their seat in Luxembourg.
Doesn't the Parliament
meet
there sometimes?
They employ about 25,000 people.
Doesn't the Parliament meet there sometimes, the European Parliament?
Not anymore.
In Strasbourg?
The Parliament has this kind of strange rule that the Secretariat is in Luxembourg, The commissions are meeting in Brussels, and the monthly sessions are in Strasbourg.
How does anything get done with this?
Well, it has been, at the beginning it was an idea to have a parliament which would cover not only one city but would be a bit...
Right.
It is still functioning, but I would not hide that there are oppositions from the parliament who would like to regroup in one single location.
I see, right.
But for the moment this is not done.
You mentioned before that there has historically been a large Luxembourg population in this country. Is this still the case?
Well, there are still, it's less the case because it is an immigration which is now third or fourth generation.
I see.
So but there is a kind of revival of the Luxembourg identity. It's not as big as it used to be. For instance, in Chicago you had the Luxembourg Brotherhood. They just celebrated their 125th anniversary a few months ago, and in Chicago, this was really a concept. And apparently, when a politician wanted to have something in Chicago City, he went to visit the Luxembourgers to feel how the air was, because they were kind of. And we had also a kind of monopoly on greenery, on vegetables. They grew the vegetables and they sold it in the market. You had to be Luxembourger to do that. It was kind of mafia in a way.
In the Midwest?
In Chicago.
In Chicago.
In Chicago we're very strong. And then around we have many villages in Wisconsin, in Illinois, and around the Great Lakes, where you have, when you see the names in the cemeteries or when you in a telephone book, you find many familiar names. And we have now a society which is kind of reviving the heritage. It's called Luxembourg American Cultural Society. They have their city in Wisconsin, but they cover all the United States, and they try to develop the feeling of being an American Luxembourger.
Is there a Luxembourg national poet?
Oh yes, that would be Michel Roland, who was...
What I'm trying to say is there
no, he's the one who has
Luxembourg literature.
There is a very active literature. It started in the 19th century with Michel Roland, who had even a way of crystallizing the language, which was mainly a spoken language. Right. And he wrote an allegory which called the Noena, which means a fox. But these were animals which were in dresses like humans, so he had a great role in the development of a written Luxembourg language. But nowadays we have a very strong literature which is normally trilingual. Well, not the same. Some write in French, some write in German, and some write in Luxembourgish.
So the French have a French market as well. The Germans have a German market.
Yes, and Luxembourg
have to stay where they are. I see. Well,
although there are some Luxembourgers are now being translated. So
oh well, of course, yes. We'll get to the US in a minute, but now that we're on to Europe, we may as well stay there for a while. Luxembourg, of course, if anybody knows anything about Luxembourg, it's usually the fact that Luxembourg was one of the 6 original countries that signed the Treaty of Rome. I think you did sign the Treaty of Rome.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And therefore were in the ground floor, as it were, of the construction of the European Union. And Luxembourg, of course, is in the Eurozone. How are you faring in the current Eurozone crisis? It seems to me that you're doing better than some of the other countries around you. For example, I think your debt is something like 0.9% at the moment, your national debt.
That is deficit. So that is
deficit, I mean.
Yes. Well, we have been faring quite well. We had, of course, our troubles too, because we are a very open economy, and so since our major trade partners are within Europe, and the whole European zone was doing badly, we have felt the repercussion of that. But our public finances have been in better order maybe than others until now, and so we are mainly within the Maastricht criteria. It means our public debt will be less than 1% this year, and it should be equal in 2 or 3 years. based to zero. That's also the public deficit. Our public debt is about 25% at the moment. Which is well beyond.
I met the deficit.
Well beyond what others have.
Oh, absolutely.
And so, which explains also that we are among the few in Europe who maintained their AAA status.
But you also have the highest standard of living in the European Union, as I remember it. Your GDP is.
Yes, even though that is a little bit cheating, because statisticians have rules, and they divide to calculate the GDP per capita. They divide it by the number of inhabitants. But which would be in our case 500,000.
Right.
If you were objective, you should divide it by the number of people who work for the economy,
right,
which are 700,000.
Right.
So the numbers would be lower, but still we would be among the more prosperous within the European Union. One of the reasons for our prosperity is also that the country is so small.
It's a small
if you
economy.
compare us to the region around Frankfurt, to the region around London, to the region around Paris, we are more or less at similar levels. But these countries, they all have backwaters where things are much worse, and that brings the average down. For us, the whole country is a prosperous zone, so it does make a difference, and that explains why there is this apparent enormous discrepancy, which is not that big. We are not complaining, of course. Things are going reasonably well, but the difference with other countries is not as high as mere statistics would show.
Now, in terms of the Eurozone as a whole, things would seem to be slightly better than the forecasts had shown they would be, and the talk of the end of the Eurozone and indeed the end of the Euro are perhaps receding. Would you agree with that?
Well, the talks of the end of the Eurozone were mainly outside Europe. In Europe, the large majority of people never thought about the death of the Eurozone, because we all were conscious that that would have been a disaster for not only the zone but for each of the countries member of the zone. A return to national currencies would have been unsustainable.
Yes, but
the talk was very much of economists, mainly Anglo-Saxon economists, who saw it from outside, and where sometimes we suspect they had an agenda. But as you said, things have improved, not massively, but they have improved in comparison. 2 years ago, you would have come here, the first question you would have asked me is, how long is the euro going to last? So that's a question nobody asks me nowadays,
right,
because we all know that the euro has survived the worst of its crisis, and we are now going up. That is due to the fact that we have done a lot of efforts. We have created the European Stability Facility.
Yes.
We have created the European semester, which is a coordination of the national budgets of member states.
Right.
We are on the point of having a banking union. All this, plus there has been massive efforts in restructuring public finances. So all this has brought that our fundamentals have improved. The result has been that slowly the situation has gone better, that since mid this year the Eurozone as a whole is out of the recession, that even the countries which were worst touched in the south of Europe are doing better. Even the sacrifices of population were high, but Ireland, Portugal, and even Spain are looking that they will not need an additional program to get out of their present difficulties. We are calculating that the growth will come back next year. It will be still modest, about 1%, but it shows that things are slowly getting better. The only point of general preoccupation is that unemployment throughout the Eurozone has remained high. Unacceptably high in the southern countries, of course, but even in a country like mine, we have about 7% unemployment now, which is a peak in our unemployment. So that is the problem which most of us will have to face in the future. But because of all these efforts of restructuring our finances, of making many efforts also to reduce our debt, I think the fundamentals have improved a lot. And so that will probably help the zone to survive quite well. And another thing I wanted to point out is that the currency itself has been, throughout the crisis, remarkably stable and strong.
Yes.
When we started the euro, the parity was €1 for $1.
Yes.
And then at the beginning it went quickly below the dollar, and everybody started to say, you see, we know.
Right, yes.
Throughout the crisis, it has been between 125 and 130 and 140.
Yes.
Dollars for euro. So
yes.
And it has been remarkably stable and predictable. That is something which is an enormous asset. If you remember how it was before we had the euro, whenever we had a financial crisis, each country tried to have its solution on a national manner. And normally we had a turmoil. There was a monetary crisis, some had to devaluate, others had to reevaluate, and it put the whole system together. We survived this crisis so well also because we had a stable currency which was which was throughout the zone, and which was a strong currency and has remained a strong currency in comparison to other major currencies.
So what do the countries of the European Union learn from this shock?
Well, we learn...
Other than that they should all stick to their commitments.
No, we know that we have to, when we do commitments, we have to take them seriously, not only to make them appear nice on the paper, but that we have to accept to renounce to a part of our economic sovereignty to work together. For instance, we had told people 5 years ago that member states had to coordinate their national budgets.
Right.
So we are crazy. That is a national thing. We cannot do that. Nowadays, it's a practice. And this is going to evolve. When we have a banking union, we have common rules throughout the banking system in Europe, which also is a kind of infringement of national sovereignty, but not to diminish, but to do something together which will be for the common good. And that is something which is now generally recognized in Europe, except maybe in the UK, where they plan to take the consequences.
Right. But is there perhaps an attitudinal difference which makes some countries less willing to accept this kind of discipline than others? And is that perhaps geographic?
Well, I would say that those who have started...
I mean, I would even say, is that perhaps religious, but it couldn't be.
No, but well, there is a different outlook on what the EU is among the core members, I would say, and those who have joined later or who are joined from the north, west, I would say. Those from the northwest see it more as a kind of opportunity to improve the common market and to sell their goods better, in a better way, but do not think that one should become a stronger unity, or at least are not that convinced that that is something essential for Europe to progress. The newcomers from the east see it mainly as a way to make sure that their security is guaranteed and that they have a framework which allows them to their economy to prosper. But also they have, because they have regained their liberty so recently, are not immediately ready to give it up again. Because they have been for 50 years, they had nothing, well, they had a limited autonomy in their countries. They have now recovered full sovereignty, so they enjoy this, of course, and it will be more difficult for them to go backwards, or they will probably have to do, but it will be slower and more complicated. But among the core countries, there is really, I would say, France, Germany, Benelux, Italy, and a few other Austria and countries around, have a deep conviction that if we want to continue not only to prosper, but to play also a role in the world as a region, we have to do things more in common. And that means, of course, that you do it less nationally. And we are basically ready to take these commitments. Of course, there is some limitations because they don't want that the population suffers from it.
Right.
But the fact that this, in the next 20, 30 years, has to go on mandatorily if we do not want to slip back into a small region of a large world, that is something I think which is deeply ingrained in all our political elites and even among the population.
That's what I was going to ask. Again, that was going to be my next question, and that is, to what extent is the ordinary Luxembourger willing to make whatever sacrifices are necessary in order to remain part of this European Union? Perhaps it's not fair in terms of Luxembourg because you were there at the very beginning and you're one of the founding countries. But I mean, so therefore, on a larger scale, to what extent is there a gap between the political commitment that you're talking about and what the average European citizen is willing to do?
Luxembourgers are, according to all statistics, the most pro-European countries in Europe. And that comes from a reason. We had never had full sovereignty. Until World War II, we were, of course, an independent country, but we were neutral, so politically we had some limitations. And we had always a problem that our territory was too small to sustain our economy. So we always had to join a partner. At the beginning it was Belgium, then it was the European Union, and it was without that back market, we were not able to develop ourselves. I told you that during the 19th century, where we had real borders, we were starving to death. We had to export our population because they could not feed themselves. This territory is too small to be able to ensure a prosperous. We need a big economic background, and that we could only do from the beginning through an alliance with other countries. We had never our own money. We had before the World War I, we were together with the German money, and after World War I, we were together with the Belgians. With euro, we have actually one sovereignty because we are now one out of the 27, the 17 members which are in the bank. In Belgium, we were not member of the Belgian National Bank. They did it for us. We were consulted, but we were not full member. So we have gained in sovereignty by that. And then we see, of course, the practical things. At least people of a certain age, young ones, take it all for granted.
Right.
But I remember a time in the 50s and 60s when you were stopped at the border, you had to show your papers, and the border is quickly reached in Luxembourg.
Of course.
It's not that you have to travel a lot. Everybody sees the border every day, and sometimes you had to open your suitcases and so on. You could not import coffee, you could not import. So nowadays, life has been, we don't see the borders anymore. We get TVs from abroad. We get the currency even. Before 2002, most shopkeepers in Luxembourg had 3 different accountabilities. One in francs, Luxembourg francs, one in French francs, and one in Deutschmark, because the foreigners who came to buy didn't bother always to make an exchange, and they paid in mark or they paid in French francs, and you had to have a triple accounting. Now the euro is for everybody. You don't even, and you can compare prices, and that makes things so much easier. And that is something, and also the fact of the frontier workers, I spoke before, you could never have done that without the European Union.
Of course.
Because they would not be able to work in Luxembourg without a permit. Right. They could not take their retirement or their social security in their own country without any limit. That is all things which have made, and we are deeply conscious of that. And since we had never had a very strong nationality to begin with, the giving up of it and the counterpart of peaceful, which is also something new for us. I think it's the first time that we had 70 years of peace in a row. In
course,
our whole
no
history.
war, yes.
We had this big fortress, we had always wars, and it was always between France and Germany who tried each one to.
Yes.
And this is something which is an enormous, and the prosperity, of course, which we had never experienced before either. So for us, and I mean, every Luxembourger recognizes this, the European Union had brought us advantages which we never had by ourselves.
Could we get back to the US now? So after 110 years, what are relations with the US like now? I gather there are some issues like, for example, Luxembourg banks not being as willing as they might be to give information which the United States wants. But other than that sort of thing.
Well, the relation, as I said when we had this party last week about the 110th anniversary, has never been as good. They are based on a common history, our immigration, which is strong. They are based with something which is probably unique, and they said Luxembourg is probably the most pro-American country in Europe. And that comes from the fact that twice your GIs came and liberated us, gave us back our freedom and our independence. We had the first time we were occupied, World War I. Second time we were annexed. And without the American GIs, we might be today a German province. So we are all conscious that if we have lived today as an independent country, that is due to the fact that so many soldiers during the Battle of the Bulge gave their life for our liberty in a way.
Yes.
That is a depth of gratitude which is deeply ingrained in every Luxembourger. Since then, of course, we have prospered a lot. Our our political relations have developed first through NATO, even though we are the largest and we are the smallest in the alliance. Right. But we have common goals, common values. Then also through the European Union, we try to have common ideas about foreign policy. Nowadays, we are members of the United Nations Security Councils for this year, next year.
Yes, you just become a member.
Where we cooperate.
Was that the first time?
First time in our history.
Yes.
And where we probably a long time before next time.
Yes.
And we cooperate very closely with the United States on many things, especially also on Syria, on the humanitarian part of Syria.
Right.
And so there we have a very close cooperation, but especially economically, the relations have grown very closely. We have about 100 American companies which have invested in Luxembourg. When we started our first economic diversification, which was in the 60s, it was done mainly with American companies, big companies, Goodyear, DuPont Nemours, these kind of companies who started. And they have continued to come there and they continue to develop. But also from the other side, we are the 5th European investor in the United States.
Really?
Not per capita, but in absolute terms.
Yes.
So it is quite. And so we also contribute, I say even modestly, to creating wealth and jobs in the United States. And that is something which is constantly developing and which goes very well. We are still prospecting for American companies to continue to come to Luxembourg with some success. And on the other way around, also the Luxembourg investment in the United States are increasing. And we hope that when now we will have, hopefully, the trade partnership between Europe and the United States, that will contribute even further to strengthen our links. You mentioned the finance center, which is in fact a coincidence. We were all aware that one of the principles of our finance center, which is the banking secrecy, had to disappear. Not only because of Americans, but because after the last crisis, OECD countries had decided that exchange of information should be the international norm. Yeah. And we knew for some years already that we could not resist this indefinitely. Also that pressures within the European Union were even stronger than the United States.
Right.
So it was a coincidence that the United States took this FATCA legislation,
Yes.
which says if you do not give us information, your banks are not allowed to make business in the United States, which is kind of a bit brutal, but efficient. And we are about to sign a FATCA agreement, which will be applied in Luxembourg in a way not to hurt the financial center, but of course information will be given. And we have announced that we will officially give up the banking secrecy towards Europe and the United States by 2015. So there will be a free flow of information between fiscal administrations of the EU and of the US with the Luxembourg Center. And our banks have arranged, because we did it progressively, that this should not basically hurt the operations of the finance center, because two of its pillars, one is investment funds, where we are number 2 after the United States in the world, do not need banking secrecy, and the other pillar, which is asset management, can also very well prosper without banking secrecy. So these banking secrecy will lose a few accounts, which what we used to call the Belgian dentist, in the jargon, which are people who have some money which they want to hide from their fiscal authorities. They will not stay in Luxembourg, but these are many people, but very small accounts. So it does not really, in the whole, and we will replace it by attracting the management of high asset individuals, but in a transparent way. We have the new government has already decided that we should continue to develop the financing center, but not accept anymore that it is done on monies which would be hidden from other states.
The other coincidence, you mentioned coincidence, the other coincidence is that your Prime Minister, your long-term Prime Minister, I think the longest serving leader in Europe, or certainly in the European Union, has resigned recently as a result of irregular activities by the Luxembourg Intelligence Service, which has echoes of the National Security Agency's scandal in this country. One, what was all that about? And two, are they connected?
No, they're not connected. Our problems with the Secret Service was a purely domestic one. That we had a few loose cannons.
Eavesdropping.
Well, they have been
wiretapping.
They have been wiretapping the Prime Minister himself, which is a bit unusual, I would say, and without his knowledge. And they have done a few things which they were not supposed to do. And the Prime Minister was accused, not because he is nominally the chief of the Secret Services, not to have controlled them sufficiently. And up to that, the government had to be changed. But what is now the real new event is that for the second time since World War II, and for the first time in 40 years, the Prime Minister Juncker's party, the Christian Socials, will be not in the majority but in the opposition. So they have been replaced, the government will be replaced by a tripartite coalition between the Democrats,
and the Socialists,
which is a pro-business party, the Socialists, but which would rather be moderate social democrats in our country, even if they have socialists in their name, and the Green Party, the Ecologist Party. They will have a tripartite.
But it's always a coalition.
It's always a coalition, but it will be the first time that it will be a coalition between three parties. And the reason is not that people were so dissatisfied with Prime Minister Juncker or with his party, which remains the largest party, but that after 40 years of uninterrupted government, there was a feeling that it was time to have some new air. And so I suppose that was the reason why the parties decided to do it without the largest party for once. Well, they did it already once in the 70s, and this is the second time since World War II, so it is a rather rare occurrence. But that will not, I can say from the beginning, change the basic outlook of the government. There will be nuances to be changed, but in foreign policy and in basic economic policy, the route we have been pursuing until now will be absolutely continued, even more underlined by the fact that one of the parties of the new coalition, the Social Democrats, were part of the old coalition.
Yes, I think they were
part of the old coalition,
right.
And the Democrats were part of the coalition before. So they have all, except the Greens, which are first time in government, but all the others have a long-standing government. And this fact that we govern by coalitions means also that there's a great stability in our, so it's not a big reverse of policies from one government to another, because normally one of the two was always there before, so they are not going to say, oh, I did this wrong.
But coalitions are the reality of European politics.
Absolutely. We always have, we never had a majority government.
Right. Where were you before you came to this country?
Before coming to the US, I was for 5 years in Rome, at the Quirinal, at the Italian government, and before that 5 years at the Court of St. James's.
So you've been, you're a career diplomat.
I'm a career diplomat. I never had any other job before. When I left university, I had a brief stint to be trained as a lawyer, but the day after I passed, I was sworn in the bar. The day after I entered Ministry of Foreign Affairs, so I had been lawyer for 1 day.
I see. But I see. And you've been in the diplomatic service ever since?
Ever since.
And you intend to remain in the diplomatic service?
Absolutely. We have, our diplomatic service is a professional service. We do not have political appointees in our system.
Right.
So that is, and also the fact that the government changes does not have any, because we are normally not, in average with a few exceptions, most of our diplomats are not politicized. So this, we consider us as servant of the state, not of the government, and so that will not have an influence on.
And what do have you served in this country before?
I served I lived in this country, but not in the United States. I was in New York as a permanent representative to the United Nations in the
Luxemburg,
in the mid-90s.
I see. But you've never been in this embassy as a member of the staff of this embassy?
No, I was...
What is it like for a Luxembourg ambassador working in the United States?
Well, it's a very interesting job because, especially Washington, which is a very particular capital, I have seen many of them, but this, especially the openness of information, which is, I have never been in a country where you got so many briefings, through the European Union, of course, but here every week you have 5 or 6 briefings on any subject, and if you ask one, you immediately get access. That is something which is very exceptional. And then the other one is the existence of think tanks, which are a very particular Washingtonian institution, not the fact that they are think tanks, but the way they are constituted. You have, in a normal think tank, you have people from business, from academia, former government officials, future government officials, and they all mix happily. And that is something which is quite unique, because in most European countries you have think tanks too, but they are very often exclusively academia or exclusively business, but this intermingling of different people is much more rarer, and plus the fact that these think tanks are also very open, you get very easily access to them, gives you an extraordinary insight to those people who are preparing the future of international relations. That is something I find most fascinating in Washington.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you.